Most people think Miyamoto Musashi was born a warrior. They're wrong. He was a reckless, violent youth obsessed with proving he was the strongest, and he almost destroyed himself in the process. What nobody knows, Musashi never actually trained in a formal dojo. He learned by fighting, losing, and nearly dying. Every scar told a story of failure. But there's a secret hidden in his most famous victories, a philosophical shift so radical it terrified his own opponents. Discover how this wild, almost feral swordsman unlocked an ancient principle that made him untouchable: the power of absolute emptiness. The man who never lost a duel didn't master the sword. He mastered the void. You won't find this philosophy in history books. Like and subscribe before YouTube hides this from you. Chapter 1. The Wild Blade. Picture this. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, standing in a dojo as his father sharpens his sword. The sound of the blade against the stone echoes through the room. His father looks at him with intense eyes and says something that would shape the rest of his life. The sword is not your enemy, boy. Your enemy is yourself. But young Musashi didn't understand those words yet. What he understood was simpler. His father was strong, respected, feared, and he wanted to be the same. By the time Musashi turned 15, he had already won his first serious duel. The opponent was a skilled warrior from a neighboring village. Musashi moved with an unusual technique, unpredictable and wild. When it was over, his opponent lay defeated. And as Musashi stood there, breathing hard, covered in sweat, he felt something he'd never felt before: power. He was addicted. From that moment on, Musashi became obsessed with testing himself against everyone. He traveled across provinces, seeking out renowned swordsmen, challenging them with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His reputation grew. Stories spread of this young warrior who seemed to have no fear, no hesitation. He moved like water, struck like thunder. But something was wrong. With each victory, Musashi expected to feel more complete. Instead, he felt more empty. He would stand alone at night, staring at his reflection in still water and wonder, why do I feel like I'm still losing? He had conquered every opponent he faced, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped in a cage of his own making. This hunger inside him, this need to prove himself, was consuming him from within. And Musashi was beginning to realize that no amount of victories would ever fill that void. Comment awakened. If you realize that the greatest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves, not with our enemies. Chapter 2. The Encounter with the Void. Years had passed. Musashi was no longer that young, hungry warrior. He was now in his 30s, a man whose reputation had spread across all of Japan. Everyone knew his name. Warriors trembled at the thought of facing him. He had faced hundreds of opponents, and his record was flawless. But something was happening inside him that no amount of fame could fix. One autumn morning, Musashi decided to travel to a remote mountain temple. He wasn't running away, or at least that's what he told himself. He simply needed time to think, to understand why his greatest victories felt like his deepest defeats. At the temple, he met an old monk named Takwan. The monk was tending to a garden, moving slowly, deliberately, with each gesture full of purpose. Musashi watched him for hours without speaking. Finally, the monk turned and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. "You carry a heavy burden," Takwan said softly. Musashi didn't answer. He didn't know how. "Tell me," the monk continued, "how many times have you won?" "Countless times," Musashi replied, his voice steady but hollow. Takwan nodded slowly. "And how many times have you felt truly at peace?" The question hit Musashi like a physical blow. He had never felt at peace, not once. Even in his greatest moments of triumph, there was something gnawing at him, a restlessness, a void that nothing could fill. Over the following weeks, Musashi stayed at the temple. Takwan didn't teach him sword techniques or battle strategies. Instead, he taught him something far more radical. He taught him to observe his own mind, to watch his thoughts arise and disappear like clouds passing through the sky, to understand that the enemy wasn't out there in the form of other warriors. The enemy was within. It was his own attachments, his own ego, his own need to prove himself. One day, As Musashi was meditating in the garden, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet. He realized that he had spent his entire life fighting against the current, trying to control everything, trying to dominate every situation. But what if the path to true invincibility wasn't about winning more battles? What if it was about transcending the need for battle altogether? This was the moment everything changed. Musashi began to understand that the greatest warriors aren't those who defeat the most enemies. They're the ones who have defeated the enemy within themselves, the one who whispers constantly, "You're not enough. You need to prove yourself. You need to win." From that day forward, Musashi's approach to combat transformed completely. He stopped fighting with rage and hunger. He started fighting with absolute clarity, with a mind so empty and present that his opponents didn't stand a chance. Not because he was faster or stronger, but because he was no longer constrained by fear, doubt, or ego. This was the birth of the legendary Musashi everyone would come to know. Not the young warrior obsessed with proving himself, but the enlightened swordsman who had learned to move through the world with the mind of the void. Chapter 3. The Legacy of Emptiness. The final years of Musashi's life were unlike anything anyone expected. The legendary warrior, who had faced hundreds of opponents, who had built an empire of victories, eventually retreated to a small island called Iwato. There, he spent his days not training, not fighting, but writing. He penned what would become known as the Book of Five Rings, a masterpiece that revealed the deepest secrets of his philosophy. But here's what's remarkable. The warrior everyone feared became a teacher. The man obsessed with dominating others became obsessed with understanding the nature of existence itself. Musashi had realized something profound that few warriors ever do, that the greatest battle was never against an opponent. It was against the illusions we create in our own minds. As Musashi aged, he would often sit in silence for hours watching the ocean. His students would ask him, "Master, how did you become invincible?" And his answer was always the same. "I stopped trying to be invincible. I became empty." Now, think about your own life for a moment. How much of your energy do you spend trying to prove yourself to others? How many of your decisions are driven by the need to win, to be better, to show everyone you're enough? How often do you feel that same emptiness Musashi felt, that hollow victory where you achieve something and immediately wonder, is this all there is? In today's world, we're all warriors in our own way. We battle in boardrooms and classrooms, on social media, and in our relationships. We compete constantly, comparing ourselves to others, always trying to be stronger, richer, more successful. But like young Musashi, we're missing something essential. What if the person you're really fighting isn't your competitor, your rival, or your enemy? What if it's the voice inside your head that tells you you're not enough? What if true power isn't about dominating others, but about mastering your own mind? Consider this. What would change in your life if you stopped trying to prove yourself and started living with purpose instead? What battles are you fighting that don't actually matter? And most importantly, what void are you trying to fill, and will winning ever actually fill it? Musashi spent decades learning this. He faced hundreds of opponents so he could eventually understand that facing yourself is the only battle that truly matters. He achieved legendary status so he could eventually teach that achievement means nothing without inner peace. Before he died, Musashi wrote these words, "The way to win is to move in the same way as a man in matters of little importance." He meant that life's greatest victories come not from intense struggle, but from moving through the world with clarity, presence, and emptiness, free from the burden of ego. So here's the real question. How many more victories do you need before you realize that what you're truly seeking isn't out there? It's in here, in the space between your thoughts, in the silence between your breaths, in the void that Musashi finally understood. The legendary warrior who never lost a duel didn't lose because he had already lost the only thing that mattered, his need to win. And that's the paradox that changed everything.